All right, so Happy New Year. So, Pastor, I thought to myself when Pastor asked me to fill in, I said, Self, what should I preach about? And so I prayed and I asked God, and I was trying to figure out, should I come up with something new? Or better yet, should I finish what I started a few weeks ago? And so being that it's the new year, I'm going to set a good example, and I'm going to finish what I started a few weeks ago. So we looked at the book of Haggai when I was here in November. I did 2 back-to-back weeks. And so I feel like it's just best to wrap up that series. I think it really needs to happen. And it can't be better than today. I think God worked this out the way that he does, because the title of this sermon has always been, The Time is Now. It's New Year, the time is now. And so it was really cool. I heard from a lot of people on the last 2 that I did. And it was awesome to see how people pulled different things from each one of those sermons and kind of just held on to those and used those throughout their week and throughout the past month or 2. And so, for me, I know the one that stuck with me was the hard right over the easy wrong. That one stuck out with me. That was a week 1 thing. And I know that as I've gone through decisions over the past few months, that I've really thought, should I take the easy wrong or should I just take the hard right? And so for me, I took the hard right. And I was speaking to someone else this week, and I told them that I was going to preach the rest of Haggai in this sermon series, and that individual was really excited, which never really happens for me, but that person, Randy, it was Randy. Randy was really excited about it, and he brought up a good point. He said, this is a book that a lot of people probably would bypass in a normal Bible study, right? It's only 2 chapters. It's nothing massive, and so it doesn't get a lot of attention. But we're going to give it some attention, and today it's going to be pretty good. So I'd like you guys to stick with me. It's not going to be a lot of humor this week, unfortunately. So if you're looking for a little bit of a comedy show this week, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to tell any stories about my running mishaps this week. But I'm going to really get into it and really focus on what God has to say to the people of Israel in this last chapter of Haggai and what he has to say to us today. So if you missed the previous weeks, I kind of want to give you a little bit of a backstory, so that way it'll make sense. I'll try to catch everybody up as quick as I can. And like I said, it is going to be a little difficult this week. It's going to be a little bit tough, so I'm going to bring it, and hopefully, is that okay with you guys if I bring it a little bit this morning on the new year? Is that okay? All right, because I'm going to try to bring what God laid on my heart. So if you missed the previous weeks, this is kind of how it went. We talked about in 587 BC, the Babylonians under the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Judah, completely destroyed it. They destroyed the temple that Solomon had built, and it was more than a physical blow for them. It was also a spiritual blow to God's people. So it was kind of like a double whammy here that they got. So they said, not only did you destroy everything that we loved, but you destroyed the house of our God. So they were dealing with all that, and for 5 decades, the Jewish people were in captivity, right? They were held in Babylon. They were in bondage. They weren't able to go home. And so finally, when they were allowed to go back home, and they were able to start rebuilding the temple, they probably were pretty excited about it, right? 50 years, they were away from home. And that's all they wanted to do was go home and rebuild the temple, and here we go. God has set them free, and he's sending them back. So they were pretty excited to go back. And so they go back and they start to build God's temple, but they also start to build their own homes during this time. And so they started to really spend a little bit more time building their own home compared to God's home. So there's a little bit of a problem there, and that was kind of the first week we dealt with that problem. And so they started out really, really strong, though. They had laid the foundation. It wasn't the same foundation that was originally there, but it was a foundation, and they built the altar. Started off really good. And then all of a sudden, they got a little bit of opposition from the Samaritans. The Samaritans came in, and the Israelites were, oh, no, what do we do? We can't, oh, no. They don't want us to build this. We got to stop. And that's what they did. They quit. A little bit of opposition, and they quit. That's when God called on Haggai, right? He raised them up and said, Haggai, tag, you're it. I'm going to have you tell these people what they need to hear. And so they started again, right? Haggai told them, hey, we got to get started again. The time's now. And then they became incredibly discouraged after they started again, right? They were good, then they were discouraged. Then they were good again, and then they got discouraged again. And so that's kind of where we left off. And so as we pick up the story this week, you'll find that many of them really battle the same battles that we deal with, right? When we think that we're trying to do what God asked us to do, but then things just aren't going well, right? They thought, hey, we're doing what you're asking us to do, but things really aren't going well. And we kind of face that too. And so we're trying to do all these things that God's calling us to do, and we feel like we're not making any progress. And so we're trying to obey you, God, right? We're trying to do what you're asking us to do, yet our life still isn't working out very well. It's just not working. We're trying to do what you're asking us to do. And you can almost feel the cries of their hearts here in this chapter. God, we're obeying you, yet where are you? Right? They start to ask, where are you at? Where are the results? And so is it really worth it to serve and obey God? And this is a question I believe many people were asking God. And quite honestly, many people ask that same thing today, right? Like, God, I'm trying to do life your way. I went to church, I'm trying to do this thing, and yet my life still isn't working the way that I believe that it should. And as a youth leader and a pastor in training, quite honestly, I see this a lot when dealing with people. I see it out in the real world all the time. I see it in the church. I see it on the district. And I get to speak to a lot of people outside of these walls in the extracurricular activities that I'm involved in my normal everyday life. And so people know that I'm a youth leader, and people know at work that I'm taking classes to be a pastor. And so I get to hear all kinds of things from these people on why they believe, and I hear mostly why they don't believe. You'd be surprised, a lot of people really don't believe that God exists, and it blows my mind. And I have people tell me things like my husband and my wife and my girlfriend or my boyfriend, they don't want anything to do with me, and I'm always broke, and I'm addicted to this, that, and the other thing. And I hear all these things, and I try to tell people, hey, just come to church, right? Just come here and come one time to see what it's all about, right? You get to hear God's word, and you get to kind of see what God can do. See what happens when you're open and receptive to God, right? And sometimes they do show up. I've had some people show up, and they give it a chance. And other times I have people tell me, I've already done it. I've already tried. I've gone, it didn't work. I went 20 years ago and something bad happened and I'll never go again, right? I love that one. I hear that one a lot. Oh, one time I went and this person in the church told me something I didn't like, and so I'll never go again. Well, you're not there to hear what people in the church have to say. You're there to hear what God has to say to you. Amen. Right? So they tell me this all the time, it just didn't work. And my question is, what do you mean it didn't work? What do you mean it didn't work? Explain that to me. And then you get more, I came one time or I went 2 times, and the follow-up is, and my significant other, they tell me still doesn't want anything to do with me, and I'm still broke, and I'm still this, and I'm still that, and I'm still all these other things. And fill in the blank with what they still are. And I usually come back, well, you only came one time. You have to keep trying it. You have to keep coming back. But it didn't work, they'll tell me. So if I'm honest, in these situations, I like to give a lot of honest perspective, and my wife can tell you this, and sometimes it's not the best, but I'm pretty blunt with people, and I'll say things like this, you've been smoking dope for years, you've cheated on your significant other multiple times. You've been spending more than you make your whole life. You've been ignoring God for most of your life, and you think he's going to fix it in 1 hour? You've ignored him your whole life, and you're going to give him 1 hour and tell him to fix it. And some people will be like, yeah, I'm hoping so. That's not legit, people. That's not how this works. I tried the thing, I said the prayer, I did something good, I went to church, and it's not working. That's what they tell me. So is it even worth it to try to obey God? And so this was kind of the context as we wrap up the final week. The Jewish people were trying to build the temple. It wasn't going the way they thought it would. They were really struggling with it. And they were wondering, that started to creep into their minds, is it even worth it to obey God in this area of our lives? And so this brings about the problem that I want to talk about today. It's a problem that they battled with. It's a problem that I've battled with. And chances are it's a problem that many of you have battled with too. If you're taking notes, I call it the problem of conditional obedience to God. It's the problem of conditional obedience to God. And so, okay, God, I'm in as long as you're delivering. I'm all in. As long as you're delivering what you're doing, I'm there. God, I'll obey as long as it doesn't cost me too much. I got you, God. I'll listen to what you have to tell me as long as it doesn't cost me too much. But if it makes me a little uncomfortable, if it starts to be a little inconvenient, or you're not doing what I think you should do at this point, God, I'm going to pull back a little bit. It's conditional obedience. I'll obey as long as it doesn't make me uncomfortable, or I see the results that I want to see. It's conditional obedience. Conditional obedience. And so I don't know how many of you have ever felt like God was moving upon you to do something to help somebody else. I know I have. I've sat in a drive-thru and felt like, boy, you should just pay for the meal behind you. I don't know why, but you should. And I go, okay, God, I'll do it. Or you're sitting in church and you're like, maybe I should just go give that person a hug today. I don't know why I feel like I should, but I should. And so, it happens often for me, and I'm sure it happens often for you too, and I try to always make it a rule that if I feel like I'm supposed to do something for somebody else, I assume that it's probably God, right? It's not Satan going, hey, be generous and serve some other people, right? It's not Satan doing it. So we know that it's God most likely doing it, right? And so that's kind of just a rule I've learned is if I feel that, it's most likely God telling me to do it. And so I'm going to tell you a story that I've heard someone else tell. Another pastor told me this story. And so when he was a young Christian, he was like 20 years of age, and he was barely a follower of Jesus. And he went to church, and one week he was in worship. He decided to look up and look around. And so what he did was he looked around and he saw this lady. And for him, her appearance looked like she had more pain in her life than most people should have experienced at that age, right? And so I'm sure most of you know what that looks like, or you know what I'm talking about here. It was just her demeanor and her overall appearance looked like life had really given her a hard time. And so anyways, back to the story. She was worshiping God, and he just felt this deep down compassion for her. He felt this feeling, and he assumed, rightfully so, that it was probably God saying, hey, you should go give her the money that you have in your wallet. He just felt like God was urging him to just go give her the money he had. And so he was a college student at that time. If you know anything about college students, is we're broke, right? When we're in college, we're broke. Like someone's like, I'll buy you a pizza. You're like, yes, thank you. You think it was a sirloin steak, right? Something awesome that they were buying you. So this guy was broke. He's sitting in church the one Sunday, broke, doesn't have a whole lot, cracks open his wallet, $5 bill. He goes, how ridiculous is this, God? You want me to walk up to this lady that I barely know and hand her a $5 bill? And he went, I might as well do it. God's calling me to do it. It seems insignificant to me, but I'm going to do it. And so he gets up, and he is having this argument. Should I give it to her? Should I not give it to her? This seems really weird, God. It's just $5. Why am I doing this? This is embarrassing. So he's having this internal conflict, and he decided, you know what? I'm going to do it. And so he went up to her, and he said, ma'am, I'm sorry. He said, I hope this isn't embarrassing for you, but I just felt like I should give you this. And it's all I really have. And to his surprise, she looked shocked. And she looked at him, and she looked at the $5, and she looked back at him, and she looked at the $5, and she looked back at him, and he had no idea what was going on. He said, did God multiply it to a $5,000 bill? Like, he couldn't understand why she kept looking up and back at him and what was going on in her mind. And she just reached out and she hugged him. And she was just going crazy, and she just started just making a really big deal about it. And he started to try to walk away because he didn't want it to be a big deal. And she grabbed a hold of him, and she said, I don't think you really understand what this means. She said, I'm a single mom, and I don't get paid until tomorrow. I had enough gas to get to church, but probably not enough to get home, and certainly not enough to get to work tomorrow. And she said, I really wanted to worship God today. And he said, and she questioned God. She said, God, what do I do? What do I do? God said, drive to church, trust me to meet your need. And she said, God met my need in you. So the young man was like, wow, like this is crazy. And he was like, I'm so glad I met your need, but that was my lunch money, right? And so he was like, he was happy that I gave it to her, but at the same time, a little upset. And some of us get like that. We're generous to an extent. And the cool thing was the guy came up to him and said, hey, do you want to go to lunch? And he's like, no, thanks, not this week. And the guy said, no, do you really want to go to lunch? And the guy's like, no, I can't, maybe next week. And the guy said, no, really, come with me, I'm buying. And this guy was like, you're buying, I'm in. He got an $8 lunch, and it was a $3 upgrade on what he had. So that wasn't too bad. He was like, how about that for the goodness of God, right? He had $5 in wallet, got an $8 lunch. Pretty awesome deal if you ask me. And so how awesome is that he felt moved by God, he obeyed God, gave something that seemed irrational and insignificant, and it met a perfect need in that woman's life. And he got an upgrade on lunch. I mean, that's how good God is. So now let's fast forward a little bit. Around that same time frame for this man, around 19, 20 years old, had the exact same feeling in church when he saw a gentleman who looked like he had had a really difficult time as well. And he heard God saying, give him everything you have. And he looked in his wallet, and lo and behold, this time, he just had a birthday, and he had a $100 bill in his wallet. And so he must have had a birthday, because there's no way a college kid is carrying a $100 bill. I should know. I never had one. So he starts having this argument again. Should I not? Should I do it? Oh, God, what am I going to do? This time, he didn't obey the feeling. He did not do what he felt that he was supposed to do. And so with this story, what you could say is that he had $5 obedience, but not $100 obedience. It's conditional. It was a conditional obedience that he had. I'll do it as long as it doesn't cost me too much. I'll have $5 obedience, but not $100 obedience. And so situations like this will leave you with questions like, how did God want to use what I had to make a difference in that person's life? You know, when you don't act on that, when you ignore God and you don't obey what he's asking you to do, you kind of get left with those questions. You know, there's a residual effect of, boy, I really missed an opportunity. What blessing could I have had for that person if I would have done that thing that God was calling me to do? And so we kind of miss out on that blessing that God might have had for us in turn for being obedient. And so that's what happens with conditional obedience. You know, I tend to call that also selective listening. If you want, parents will understand this. I see it a lot in teens, especially in my kids. I don't know if your kids are like this, but they hear what they want to hear. You know, hey, kids, come here, help me with the garbage. Nothing. Kids, hey, garbage. Let's go. Nothing. And under my breath, you know, you can't hardly hear it. I'll say $20. And then boom, there they all come running, right? Out of the woodwork, they all come. Oh, $20. Yeah, I'll take $20. You know, but that's selective listening, right? They hear what they want to hear. And that's no different when it comes to God, right? Like, we're going to hear what we want to hear. I'll obey the commands that I want to hear. And we all can be like this. You know, I love the part about God, about the whole plans in God's heart to bless us and to prosper us, not to harm us and to give us hope in a future. I love that verse. God, that's awesome. I love it. But forgive my enemies? Screw that. You don't know my enemies. I'm not forgiving my enemies. You're crazy, right? I hate my enemies. Oh, pray for my enemies. I got you, God. I'll do that. I'll pray for them. I'll pray for them for a place that they can go too, right? And so that's what happens. Like, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to do it. It's selective listening. Right? I'll take this one part, but I'm not going to take the other part. You know? And so, you know, God works all things out for the good of those who, I love that verse, God. Love it. Love it. Love everything about it. It's so good. It's so good. But wait until I'm married to share an intimacy? Ha! No chance, God. You're talking to the wrong guy here. You don't understand. You don't understand what it's like to be a man, God. Not going to do it. I'm just not going to do that. Forget it. Not happening. It's selective listening. We choose what we want to hear, when we want to hear it. And so the whole thing is, I'll obey as long as I'm comfortable, right? It's conditional obedience. But we need to understand that the text is, the text is going to get really, really serious here in a minute. God's really going to tell us something amazing this week. And it's that God does not give us options to consider, but he gives us commands to obey. God doesn't give us options to consider. They're commands to obey. And so we're going to see here how God shows his people very clearly what I've described as the corruptive power of sin. So we're going to kind of look at the corruptive power of sin. And this is what Haggai does. Haggai is going to point this out. And so if you remember earlier, God's people turned away from God and they started to worship idols, right? And their hearts were not with God. They put their own homes ahead of God's home, right? And so God tells Haggai the prophet to ask the priest some questions. Okay, so Haggai is going to question the priest now. He's going right to the spiritual leaders. He's going to ask some questions of the priest. Now, these questions are going to seem a little weird at first, okay, because they are a little weird. But I'm going to try to unweird them a little bit, and then they'll make a lot more sense to you after I unweird them. Okay, so if you guys want to turn with me to Haggai chapter 2, verse 12. Again, it's easy to find. It's in the Old Testament, and it's between the often read books of Zephaniah and Zechariah, right? So it's usually between those two books. If you guys can't find it, we will have it on the screen. We always have it on the screen. But I'll give you a second to get there in Haggai. It's Haggai chapter 2, verse 12. And so here's what Haggai asks one of the priests. He says, if one of you is carrying some meat from a holy sacrifice in his robes, stop there, it's weird, right? That's weird right off the get-go here. So we're going to stop right there. Here's what it means. So what happens was the priest, when they were going to go to sacrifice, they would always wear their robes. And they would take a holy or sanctified meat, and they would then take the robe and fold it up into like a little pocket to keep the meat. And so that's why he's talking about having meat in your robe. That was something that they did. And so what Haggai is going to ask is if your robe, which is now kind of like touching something holy, brushes up against something that is unholy, does the holiness rub off on the unholiness, and does the unholiness become holy? And so that's what he's going to ask. He says, if one of you is carrying some meat from a holy sacrifice in his robe, and his robe happens to brush against some bread or stew or wine or olive oil or any other kind of food, will it also become holy? What'd the priest say? No. Of course, no, that's silly, right? In other words, the holiness doesn't rub off. And so I'll give you a modern example. If I clean my hands, and my hands are nice and clean, and then I go and touch a dirty plate of spaghetti, do my clean hands make the dirty plate clean? No, that'd be pretty awesome, though, but no, that is not it. No, the dirty plate actually might make my clean hands dirty, but not the other way around. And so this is what Haggai was saying, and then he illustrates that principle in verse 13. So Haggai says this, if someone becomes ceremonially unclean by touching a dead person, you touch a dead person, and now they're unclean, that makes you unclean, and then if that person touches any of these foods, will they be defiled? And the priest answered yes to that one. So I have a story here about my wife's shaking her head, about a dead guy that I found one day driving to work. The teens know this story. It's a great story. I won't tell all of it. But I was driving to work, and I was going across 18. It was 6:45 in the morning. And to my right, I see what appears to be a dead man in a ditch, right? There he is. He's lying in a ditch. And it takes me a second to realize that there's a dead man in a ditch. And so, of course, I pull over, because who wouldn't want to see a dead man in a ditch? So I pull over. And the car in front of me, I could see, is having the same thoughts as I was, because they were touching their brake lights, and they're like, should I, shouldn't I? He pulls over. So this young guy jumps out of a car, and he says, that guy's dead. The first thing's out of his mouth, and I said, 100%. I said, let's go. So we run back down the 18, and we get down there. And I'm going to do what the priests do. I'm not touching a dead body. I'm not going to do it. I don't want to be, it's unclean, right? So like the priests, of course you're not going to touch a dead body. I make the young guy do it. I say, hey, buddy, kick him. He looks at me and I say, kick him. I'm not doing it. So the kid kicks him. Nothing. He's dead. I said, kick him again. Kicked him again. Guy wakes up. I was disappointed. I went to work. Okay? That was the story. There you go. But yeah, really. He was asleep. At 6:45, he had walked from Farrell Hospital. Crazy story, I'll tell you another time. But like the priest, I wasn't going to touch an unclean dead body, so I made the other guy do it. Anyways, back to the story. So what he's doing here is he's basically showing that sin is like a disease, right? Sin spreads a lot easier than holiness does. And if you really think about it, you'll know that to be true. It's the corruptive power of sin. And so Paul said it this way in the New Testament. He said, bad company corrupts good character. Bad company corrupts good character. He didn't say good company cleanses bad character. He said it that there's a corruptive power of sin. That bad company corrupts good character. And so you could say sin's like the spaghetti sauce. It stains everything that it touches. And so this is where the text gets a little bit tough here in verse 14. So in verse 14, Haggai responded, that is how it is with this people and this nation, says the Lord. Everything they do and everything they offer is defiled by their sin. So let me say it this way, and this is the challenging part. Because they turned away, because their hearts are going after idols and not me. Because of that, God says, everything they do and everything they offer is defiled by their sin. And so we can say it this way: when your heart isn't right with God, everything you do will be wrong. Let me say it again. It needs to sink in a little bit. When your heart's not right with God, everything you do will be wrong. And I can hear some people right now pushing back a little bit on that. I don't know about that. I don't know. It doesn't sound right to me. I think I could still, my heart doesn't necessarily need to be right with God. I think I could still do right things. Wrong. We're going to look right here in the New Testament. Jesus tells us. I want to go to Matthew 5, 23 through 24. Here's what Jesus said about it. Jesus said this. He said, hey, if you're going to go to church one day and you want to give an offering, I'm paraphrasing, and you're going to go up to the altar and you want to put the offering on the altar, but first you remember that you have something in your heart that's against someone else. What does Jesus say to do? He says, first, leave your gift at the altar. Go and make yourself right. Get your heart right. Then come back and give your gift at the altar. Right? I paraphrase that a little bit, but there's the words for you exactly what he says. He says, leave your sacrifice at the altar. Go and be reconciled with that person. Then come back and give your gift. If your heart's not right, then it's not right. Doesn't matter what you do. Whatever you do is wrong. And parents, you know this is true with your children. One kid does something wrong to the other kids, so what do? Kid one, apologize to kid two right now. Kid one walks up, sorry, walks away. Does that count? Of course it doesn't count. So what do? It was the right thing. It was the wrong heart. Get back over here. Not quite. So now you tell them, come back over. They come over. Say it like you mean it. Sorry. Still not right. Right? It's still not right. It's the right thing, wrong heart. So you tell them again. I'm sure it doesn't happen at your house, but it happens maybe at mine. You tell them again. This time you're going to say sorry, and you give them a hug. Right? So they come up, I'm sorry. There's the hug, right? They do the hug, and there they go. It's a little bit better. So attitude matters, and it matters with our relationship with God as well. If your heart isn't right, whatever you do is completely wrong. Your heart has to be right. And so what do we see often is, oh God, I'll obey you, I'll obey you, I'll obey you, I'll obey you. As long as you do what I want you to do. God, I'll obey you as long as this is going to work out for me. God, I got you. I'll do this as long as it's going to work out. I'll obey you as long as it doesn't cost me too much or isn't inconvenient to me at all. I'll give you $5 obedience, God, but I'm not going to give you $100 obedience. And so this is just a completely dead wrong approach to God. And so we need to understand that we do not obey God so that he will bless us. Let's get that out of the way right now. We obey God because we love him. That's why you obey God. That's why you listen to what he has to say. That's why you step out on faith and do what he's asking you to do, because we love God, not because we think we're going to get something back in return. Right? It's all about the heart. It's about our heart when we do things for others. It's about our heart. And so, we come to obey God because of who he is. We obey God because we love him. We want to honor him with everything inside of us, right? We want to give God that honor that he justly deserves. And so this is why getting our hearts right matters so much. And if you think this is challenging, it's going to get a little bit more difficult here. Okay, so God reminds his people, and he's going to get down to the heart of the issue here in Haggai chapter 2, verse 15. Here's what he's going to say. He says, look at what was happening to you before you began to lay the foundation of the Lord's temple. Okay, so if you were way back in week 1, you'll remember we talked about this. Before they laid the foundation, we looked at the verse that some people in here identified with. It said, hey, you're drinking, but you're still thirsty. You're eating, but you're not full. You're putting your money in pockets with holes in it. In other words, you're doing everything you can to have meaning in this life, but you're still empty. And you're accumulating as much wealth and things as having as much fun as you can, but you still feel like there's something more that you're missing. You're consuming everything that you can, yet there's nothing left over. You're working your tail off and you're not getting ahead. So what's going on with this? He said, you remember that. He's telling them, you remember that. Before you built the foundation, that's where you were. Then in verse 16, he goes on to say this. He says, when you hoped for a 20 bushel crop, you harvested only 10. We'll apply that to where we live today. You thought you were going to get paid $20 an hour, but when you get your paycheck, it comes back half as that. It's not working out like you thought it would. Next verse, he says, when you expected to draw 50 gallons from the wine press, you found only 20. Okay, so you were doing everything you could, and yet you just couldn't get ahead. So why do you think that was? Here's verse 17. Verse 17 is going to be tough for some people, and we're going to try to wade through this together, but here's what he said. God says this, I sent a blight and a mildew and hail to destroy everything you worked so hard to produce. Ouch. God says, you're working your buns off, and I sent blight and hail and mildew, and the reason you didn't get ahead is because I didn't let you. That's what God says, not me. That's what God says. Now, if I'm being honest, I don't really like that picture of God, right? That's pretty tough. That's tough. So, I'm doing all this, God. I'm trying my best, and you, God, you've sent these things to keep me from having crops? So now they start to question, is it even worth it? Why in the world would a good God stop us from having provision when we're doing everything we can just to survive? What kind of God is that? Is that the God I want to serve? Is that a God that truly loves me? Why would God do that? Here's the next part. And it's up on the screen. Here's the rest of that verse. And here's what he says. I sent the blight and mildew and hail to destroy everything you worked so hard to produce. And here's the key. Even so, you refuse to return to me. There it is. That's the reason. You see, God's not trying to punish his people. He wasn't trying to punish them. God was trying to restore them. Right? He was trying to get their eyes back on him. Restoration was the goal. He wasn't trying to punish. He was simply trying to restore. And so what I find about God is that sometimes God may not change your negative situation because God's trying to change your heart. Stop and think about that. Sometimes God might not change your negative situation because he's really trying to work on your heart. And there are times that God may not change your negative situation because he is trying to change your heart. And so let me say this because I'm probably on really thin ice in some tricky theological territory on this one. But because what I'm not saying is if something bad is going on in your life right now, that you deserve it and God is sending it. That's not what I'm saying at all. So please, let's. I don't want any emails. If you want to send emails, send them to Pastor Brian. Don't send them to me. But I'm not saying that. What we need to understand though is this. Okay, that sometimes God may allow something bad with a purpose to get our attention and draw our hearts back to him. He may allow something bad to happen with the intention of drawing our hearts back to him. And there are other times, probably many, many more, when bad things are just a result of our spiritual enemy attacking us, right? It's Satan trying to get us. Or it's the reality that we just live in a sinful, broken world where there are bad things that happen all the time. So if there's something bad going on in your life right now, it's not me saying, well, you deserve it. Okay, we're not going there. And God's just trying to get he's trying to get your attention. What I'm saying is that there are times in our lives where God will cause something to happen with the intention of bringing our hearts back to him. He's trying to pull us back. And there are times when God may allow something to happen so that we do focus back on him. And so what's really loving to me is what God did. All he did was cut off his kids' supply. Okay, I'm going to make this relatable to everybody in here now. Notice he didn't make them sick. He didn't kill their kids. He didn't do something cruel. He just cut off their supply. Did they still have food? Yes, but not as much as they had hoped for. Did they still have drink? Yes, but not as much as they had hoped for. So, here's how we'll make it relatable. If it seems a little unloving, even for a moment, remember this. If you're a loving parent, you would do the exact same thing to a rebellious kid. If your kid's off at college and you're sending them money every month to help support your kid, and your kid's smoking it away, drinking it away, partying it away, not going to class, abusing your generosity, what's the first thing you're going to do as a loving parent? You cut off the supply. Not happening. Not on my dollar. You're not representing my values. And until your heart comes back to these values, then I'm not going to continue to supply your party lifestyle. It's just not going to happen. This is exactly what God did here in Haggai. It's exactly what he did. I'm not trying to punish you. I'm trying to restore you because I want your heart. That's what God's telling him. Your heart has turned away from me. I want your heart. So if you go back to week number 1, and this is why I love the book, is because God is so simple in his love, right? Week number 1, do you remember the simplicity of God's message? They started to complain, I don't know what we're supposed to do, God. How do we start? What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And they're worried, and they're all amped up, and they don't know what to do, and they don't know the first step. And God says, I got you. I got you. Here's what I'll do. And then I could do this part all day long, but I'm not going to. I won't do it. I did it the first week. It's so easy to miss. God says this. Here's what you do. Step 1, step 2, step 3. I'm going to give you the steps. Here's what he told him. Number 1, go up the mountain. Number 2, bring down the timber. Number 3, build my temple. 1, 2, 3. He laid it out for him. He didn't leave them adrift and say, figure it out yourselves. He gave them the 1, 2, and 3. Go figure it out. Right? It's just how you do it. You just follow steps 1, 2, and 3. I'll make it simple for you. And if you miss a week of church, you miss so much. So go back and watch those messages if you weren't here during that time. They're online somewhere. But those messages were awesome, and it all leads up to this. And if you read it, God just said, do this. Go up the mountain, bring down the timber, build my house. Simple. Week 2, they're doing it, but they're discouraged. We're discouraged. Poor us. Poor us. The temple's just not coming together. People are making fun of us. Poor us. Poor us. We want to give up. What does God say? God said in week 2, he said this. It's so easy. It's so easy. Just be strong. Be strong. Be strong and do the work. Simple. Be strong, do the work. That's what he's asking you to do. Put down another stone. Put down another one, and another one, and another one. Just be faithful. Stay in the game, one stone on top of another. That's what he told him in week 2. One stone on top of another. Successful people do consistently what normal people do occasionally. Just put down another stone. Just put down another one. And here in week 3, God has one simple message. And in this text, above all else, God says this. More than anything else, God says, I want your heart. I want your heart. I want you to seek me with all your heart. That's what God's telling his people. And here's what happened. You used to love me. I used to be first. But guess what? Now you've turned away and you've worshiped other idols. I want your heart. And I don't want a little bit of it. I want all of it. I want all of your heart. I want to be first in everything. Let's go to Matthew 6:33. It says this, seek the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And then all these things will be added unto you. God says, I want you to delight in me, to enjoy me, to seek me, to delight in me. And then I will give you the desires of your heart. But first you delight in my heart. Right? That little and then in there. You do the first part, and then he'll do the rest. Right? I want you to pursue me with all of your heart. And so when you seek God with all of your heart, he says, you'll find me. I want you to put me above all else. In the New Testament, Jesus said there's one command above all others, and that is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. It's all about heart. It's all about heart. If your heart isn't right with God, then everything you do is wrong. But when your heart is right with God, you'll see him start to bless you. It's all about the heart. I want your heart. God is calling you to give your heart. I want all of your heart. I don't care if you have a nice house, but don't put your nice house ahead of my house. God says, I want your heart. And that for me is the biggest battle that I face. I could be so in love and so faithful to God, and then all of a sudden, conditional obedience, right? But God, this isn't going the way I want. But God, is it worth it? But God, right? We start asking all these different things. We don't obey so God will bless us. We obey God because we love him. So that's what we do. That's so important that we obey because we love him. And that's why corporate worship together is important. It's where we come together as a church and we corporately sing to God. We say, God, we love you with all of our hearts. We hear all of these words together in our hearts. That's why this matters, right? That's why life groups matter so much. We're going to do this together. Our hearts are in it. We're going to be in it together, right? We're a community of believers all together. God, we want to do life around your word in community, right? That's one reason why the tithe matters so much, among other things, is God, as you bring in increase, I choose in my heart to put you first and to worship you. God, I seek you with all my heart. I seek you with all of my heart. Even for me, it's so easy for my heart to be distracted, right? Even as a pastor in training, my heart is often distracted. And I have to be careful as I start my ministry, and I continue our ministry here with our youth. Bill Hybels said it this way. He said, the way I was doing the work of God was destroying the work of God in me. The way I was doing the work of God was destroying the work of God in me. And that's what I want to avoid. I want to make sure that I'm putting God first, and the other stuff will come later. I'm not putting my ministry first ahead of God, and then God's kind of an afterthought. God's got to be first in our lives. Does he have all of my heart? And so there are those of you who are just like what Jesus quoted. If you ever want to see something important, we're going to check the Old Testament. If Jesus ever quotes the Old Testament, it's important. And so he quotes Isaiah in Matthew 15:8. He says, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far away. And so I think that's a massive problem in Western Christianity is conditional obedience, honestly. I think that's a major issue that we all have. And so it's like, yeah, I'm going to do these things, God, as long as it's going well for me. It's going to be awesome, Lord. I'll do it as long as it's not too hard for me. And oftentimes it's a lot of people that honor him with their lips, but their hearts are far from him. Right? And that's what was happening here. And here's the beauty of this story. The beauty of this story is that God got their hearts. He got their attention. God got their hearts, and because their hearts came back to God, so did the blessings of God. Not because they obeyed, but because their hearts were right with God. And that's the amazing part of the story. So Haggai, back to chapter 2, verse 15, and God says to them, even though they hadn't yet finished the temple, even though they didn't do anything to deserve it, it was only because their hearts changed that God said this, I'm giving you a promise now. Now's the time to build the temple. Now's the time to get your heart right with God. Now's the time to repent of the sin that you have rationalized or justified. Now's the time to stop giving God lip service and not give him your heart. Now is the time not to put your house first, but to put his house first. Now is the time. Now is the time. And in Haggai chapter 2:19, he said this. He said, I give you a promise now. While the seed is still in the barn, he said, you have not yet harvested your grain, and your grapevines, your fig trees, your pomegranates, and your olive trees have not yet produced their crops. In other words, while you still have planting to do, it's not even the harvest time, but here is God, and this is what God says. But from this day onward, I will do what? God says, I will bless you. Even though you did not plant the seed, I promise you, you will have a harvest of blessing. Why? Not because you built the temple, but because you gave me your heart. While the seed was still in the barn, God is telling them what's going to happen. You're going to have a great crop. They haven't even done any of the work yet, but because their heart is right, God is giving them a blessing. Above all else, God says, I want your heart. And so there are those of you here today that if you're really honest, God is probably going to do a big miracle in you. And no one may see it from the outside because this one's going to happen on the inside. You may not be obeying outwardly, or you may be obeying outwardly, but you're rebellious or discontent inwardly. You may be giving them a little bit of lip service. Today, no more lip service. We're going to give him our whole heart. We don't obey God so he will bless us. We obey God because we love him. We love him with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. Now, there are those today who are returning in their hearts back to fully worshiping God. There are those of you who are going to make that commitment today. Say, you know what, you're right. It's time to go all in again. What a better time of year to start something than right now. Right? Right now. Better yet, this is a great time to finish something that may have been started last year or many years ago. Today might be the day that you finally can say, hey, God, I'm going to turn my whole heart back to you. No more lip service or obeying inward or outwardly. Today I'm going to turn over my whole heart to God. And today, in 2025, is a chance for you to turn over your heart and see how good and loving he really is. So I'm going to have the praise team come back up. I'm going to have the praise team come up, and we're going to finish with Plead the Blood. I love that song. We're asking God just to cover us and our family. And I'm going to do something this morning. We don't do it often. But I want to open the altar this morning as we sing. Because I really feel like there are people in the room that have wrestled with this and wrestled with giving God all of their heart. And they've given it some, and maybe outwardly it looks good, but inwardly maybe we're not all there. So I want to give you the opportunity as we sing this morning that you can come up and fully commit. Today's the day to start a new year and go all in. Fully commit, accept Jesus. Put down the heavy things maybe that we've been carrying. I know a lot of people, we look good on the outside, but inside we're an absolute mess. Today's the day you could just put it down. You don't have to carry it anymore. Jesus said, my yoke is easy. Come and find out today. The time's now. Why are we going to wait? Don't wait to get things right with God. We're not promised tomorrow. The world's going to continue to destroy our families, wear us down, pull us away from God, if we let it. But we can make a stand today and choose the hard right over the easy wrong. We can start by placing down stone after stone after stone, even though we might not see the results right away. God made this clear in the book of Haggai that if we turn our hearts back to him, he will bless us and he will help us complete the work. He will instruct us and be beside us. But we have to give him all of our heart. The time's now. Please don't wait. Please don't wait. As we sing, the altar's open. Time's now to turn your heart back to God. Even if you've walked with him your whole life, check your heart. Maybe you've strayed a little bit. Maybe you've filled some space with other things that are pulling you away from the things that God is prompting you to do. So let God have all of it again. The time's now, today. The time's now. I plead with all of you, the time's now. Start now, the new year. Give all of your heart. Don't wait. Don't wait. Go ahead, Patty.